So here's 100 facts about James Madison, the most sensible son, not a really not much of a mad son. He was the oldest of 12 kids. James Madison was the first house was elected to the first House of Representatives in 1789. James Madison was, of course, as part of the House of Representatives, voted on the Bill of Rights, which he was the one who wrote it. James Madison originally wrote 19 bills of rights. 12 of them were passed, but the states only accepted 10. James Madison was the primary writer of the Bill of Rights. And as a member of Congress, not only was he the author of the Bill of Rights, but he also voted for it himself. James Madison is the one who wrote arguably the most amendments that was accepted. 11 of his amendments was accepted, the first 10 being the Bill of Rights, and then the last one is like the 27th Amendment. So, anywho, the First Amendment was actually the third of his original 19 sets. So that's pretty fun. James Madison is called the father of the Congress, father of the Constitution, I mean, because of course he wrote the Bill of Rights. As up to date, James Madison is the only president who personally penned a amendment. James Madison is arguably the most successful person to ever pen amendments when it comes to like being a writer. He has the privilege of having the first and last, the First Amendment and the 27th Amendment. So he starts it and ends it. He had the longest gap between amendments, which his amendments were really passed in 1791, and the last amendment by him was passed in 1992. So yeah, of course, yeah, he had um, originally like again 19 amendments. So far, shrunk them down to like 12, and 11 were passed successfully. During James Madison's whole like Bill of Rights, only three states didn't like ratify them, and that was Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Georgia. It took them until 1939, over 100 years, for them to be passed. To put in context, the amendments were passed in 1939. To put that in context, the 13th Amendment had less states that didn't pass it than the Bill of Rights. The 13th Amendment only had Mississippi and Kentucky not pass them, which is pretty funny. So, literally, the 13th Amendment was more popular than the Bill of Rights. Isn't that funny? However, one of the primary reasons why the three states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Georgia, passed it in 1939 was it was the 150th anniversary. James Madison was only 38 when he passed the amendment. He served 8 years as president. Before he served 8 years as president, he served four servings in the House of Representatives, because remember they get voted on every 2 years. James Madison was the third of the first four who served 2 terms. That was pretty funny. James Madison was the third of the first four who actually saw combat. So again, 3/4. James Madison, of course, between 1939 and when he penned them in 1789, that was 202 years. So that's something. Um, Again, it was shrunk down. Oh wait, these are citations. Okay. Okay, so James Madison only served 1 year in the military. He was discharged because he was pretty sickly. He went from private to commander. That was like a 7 rank jump. That was very, during that 1 year, he was pretty impressive. So he got that 7 rank jump. He was the third out of the first four to be a Virginian, so that's pretty cool. He was the first president out of six James to be president. He was the first James out of the six James to be president. He was a 5 footer, you know, so that's pretty fun. And, the whole presidential heights go like this: tall, short, tall, short. So yeah, every time you had a tall person like George Washington, you would have a short person like John Adams. Um, he was known to be short, and that's one of the reasons why he was discharged from the army. He was one of two presidents to have the initials JMs, James Madison and James Monroe, and both of them had no nickname. Uh, he was the he was the second junior to become president after John Adams, who never went by Junior. Um, he was called Little Apple John because of his height. His wife Kitty was half his age at 16. It was common to marry teens back then. Kind of weird. Um, Also, his next wife was 17 years his junior, so he went from cradle robber to like I guess cougar wrestler. So that's something. Of course, Dolley's previous husband died of like cholera or something, or yellow fever. So that's something. Okay, so he had some interesting tie-ins with Aaron Burr. Actually, Aaron Burr is the guy who introduced them. Like Aaron Burr, the guy who killed the guy on a $10 bill, he was introduced by him. So of course Aaron Burr, and also Hamilton and Madison like were one-time friends. They wrote like 82 essays together. They were pretty tight. Kind of surprising. Also, they're split up, kind of helped out with creating the two-party systems, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. So that's something. Um, when they died, when James Madison died, his rivalry also also helped out with the split between the Democratic Republicans being like split into the Democrats and the Whigs. So that's something interesting. His feud with the guy on the $10 bill is quite interesting because James Madison was part of the $5,000 bill. Of course, like this is another fact about his wife being 16 years young and his next wife being 16 years older. That's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting guy. He Madison served as both Secretary of States for Thomas Jefferson, a president himself. That's very interesting. He was the first Secretary of State to become president, so that's interesting. He was the first sitting president to actually command troops in a battle, which happened in 1814. So that's very interesting. Remember, George Washington, even though he had troops, they never got into battle. So, technically, that doesn't count. Stuff like that. Um, he later on retired. and University of Washington, University of Virginia. The War of 1812 was called Mr. Madison's War. He appointed John Quincy Adams, who would be a future president, and we're going to have a video on him shortly. John Quincy Adams popularized the phrase "father of the Constitution," so I guess he got him back. Another future president, Andrew Jackson, he was under his command, and which under his command when Andrew Jackson did like the Battle of New Orleans, so that was pretty interesting. Lewis and Clark honored James Madison by naming a river. Um, um, Naming a river after him. James Madison kind of like appointed Clark at that time. Lewis was dead as like the governor of a territory. That was very interesting. He's second cousins with Zachary Taylor through his wife. That was pretty interesting. He had a little pen name that was pretty interesting. He was the very first like person, like a slave, actually documented living life to life with him. That was pretty interesting. Father of the Constitution, he had like a Virginia plan. He based the Constitution off a Virginia plan, and he had some help from somebody else. He even acknowledged it. He was educated in a college in New Jersey. Him and his wife never really had kids together. Dolley did have like one surviving kid from a previous marriage. Um, Unlike Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, he never had like a will, um, you know, um, passing his slaves down. He arguably was one of only two presidents to get like universally elected. George Washington was the first. His handwriting was so tiny and difficult, it took historians a while to figure out what he actually wrote. He was strongly opposed to the National Bank, but then he changed his mind. He freed one slave, little Billy. One slave. There was a lot of slaves named Billy. He's the guy who coined the phrase checks and balances. The original draft of the Constitution was of course lost. He was the first president to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, so that was pretty cool. He took a oath in the House of Representative chambers. That's pretty cool. Not outside. The White House was burnt during his administration, but his wife saved some very valuable things. His wife saved like a portrait. Um, of course, during the battle, they had to move the White House to Maryland for a little bit, so that was pretty interesting. Um, yeah, so he was one of only two like presidents to be solely elected. He was the only Democratic Republican candidate in 1808. Um, he was a member of this organization that wanted to send Africans back to Africa, and eventually they successfully did. Of course, his portrait was on the $5,000 bill. It got discontinued in 1945, so that's very interesting. He, of course, remember when I told you that Jefferson had like a nullification idea? He was part of it. His family was very aristocratic. He's, of course, a primary author of the Constitution, but this guy like named George, kind of like was also like a huge influence on him. Him and James Madison was like was like bed bunk buddies, like they slept in the same bed. Hey, the seat that both presidents ran for was like the 5th district. Of course, he won. This was historic because no two presidents actually ran for this district. So that was pretty cool. He was one of only 65 House of Representative members, arguably 58, because Rhode Island and North Carolina wasn't really a part of it like that. Um, you know, so that's pretty cool. Um, so the Congress granted him powers. That was pretty cool. And he asked, like, could he have a war? And America wouldn't see a president ask for a war in like 30 years until the Mexican American War. That's how bad the 1812 war was. Again, political rivals with Hamilton. He wrote a religious code. He was the first, he, during his first presidential candidacy, he ran with this guy named George Clinton. He was like the governor of New York. Of course, let's see, he held the records of like most vetoes issued for his time, like 6 vetoes. Um, Again, here's some more bank information. Uh, you know, uh, he was the first president to have a former president as his running mate. That George Clinton guy. Of course, the treaty that ended like the Christmas was the treaty that ended the whole 1812 war was before Christmas, so that's a hell of a Christmas gift. He, he was a early supporter of like a university in Washington D.C. He served 2 terms as president. His wife eventually sold off all his stuff to pay off his debts. He was the last living signer of the Declaration of Independence when he died in 1836. Towards the second part of his presidency, it was called the Era of Great Feelings because everybody was happy. At 29, he was like one of the youngest representatives. Of course, ended all with he died in like 1836, and he was, of course, the last signer. So, yeah, that's it. Pretty quick video. I hope y'all enjoy.